Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, it's one more time for legalization of weed as the M.O.R.E Act is reintroduced in the House of Representatives. Yes, that's the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. Lots of words for legalization, people, and the end of prohibition. But don't fire up that joint yet. This bill passed the House in 2020 and went nowhere in the Senate. And that was 5 years ago. And now it's going to be up to the Republicans, who have already filed the state's 2.0 Act led by Ohio's Dave Joyce and Democrat Dina Titus. As far as rescheduling goes, a war of words against the prohibitionists and the advocates is picking up steam in D.C. And 32 state attorney generals tell Congress to pass the Safe Banking Act that continues to gather dust in that same House of U.S. Representatives. And something stinks at the U.S. Open tennis tournament in New York, and that smell, and you know what that is under attack by at least one player. All that and our international reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly roundup of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. It's been a few weeks since President Trump's first public comments about rescheduling cannabis, but reaction continues to be generated on both sides of this issue. Last week, we shared reactions from some of the president's inner circle while hearing from Deputy Director of NORML, Paul Armentano. This week, there's been some action in Congress when the M.O.R.E Act was reintroduced. This was the first reform bill that was passed by the House 5 years ago, but it never reached the Senate. Of course, it was the Democrats who were more entrenched in Congress back then. And now there is actually a bipartisan co-sponsored bill called the States Act 2.0. That includes interstate commerce, a federal tax on that, and puts regulations under the Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax, and Trade Bureau. It also allows the states the right to manage their own regulations. That bill has yet to get into a committee, which is a long way from getting to the floor for a vote. Now, another resurrected legalization bill has surfaced with the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, or the M.O.R.E Act. And to sort out all of the action on Capitol Hill, here's Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The future of cannabis policy is at a crossroads as the Trump administration considers rescheduling cannabis while the Democrats push for full legalization through the reintroduction of the M.O.R.E Act. Now, the debate highlights contrasting visions for how the approach to cannabis at the federal level should be taken. Led by Representative Gerald Nadler, the M.O.R.E Act aims to remove cannabis from the federal controlled substance list completely, allowing states to decide on legalization. It would impose a federal tax, create expungement programs for past convicts, and fund community service, small businesses, and research. Now, supporters argue that this is a pivotal move toward justice, economic growth, and social justice. However, opponents, including some GOP lawmakers, are raising strong concerns. Recently, 9 Republican legislators led by Representative Pete Sessions opposed the Biden administration's proposal to reclassify cannabis from a Schedule I to a Schedule III, calling it corrupt and flawed. They warn it could benefit illegal cartels, including Chinese drug trafficking organizations, and lead to increased youth usage and health risks like schizophrenia and psychosis. Now, critics also argue that rescheduling undermines the scientific evidence and could flood streets with more drugs posing safety risks, especially to children. They say the move is driven by special interests rather than the public's health considerations. Now, despite this legislative hurdle, advocates say passing the M.O.R.E Act is essential for creating a fair, equitable, and just cannabis policy. Now, meanwhile, opponents continue to warn of dangerous consequences. Now, this debate over federal cannabis policy remains fierce as both sides advocate for the vision and the future of the industry. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Many DC-based lobby groups are galvanizing their supporters with templated petitions to Congress and to President Trump to reschedule cannabis to Schedule 3 or flat out deregulation. The Drug Policy Alliance is also gathering electronic signatures for their initiative to reschedule cannabis to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. That move does not go far enough for the DPA, who want it legalized. Kat Parker, one of their principals, shared this quote. If his administration instead moves marijuana to Schedule 3, it would still be criminalized under federal law. People will continue to be arrested for possession, while Schedule 3 may ease tax burdens for marijuana businesses. That change alone doesn't address the bigger issue that ordinary people will continue to face punishment for marijuana while large corporations profit. End quote. That distinction between the multi-state operators and the licensed, legal, smaller craft growers is a division in the industry that needs to be addressed. This past week, executive producer Jimmy Young talked with two of the organizers for MJBiz Con, the world's largest cannabis trade show that is scheduled for the first week in December in Las Vegas. Here's Jimmy with Emilee Lewis and Harrison Raide.
Usually this is a one-on-one segment, but this time we have two distinguished guests from the largest, biggest day in the cannabis industry every year is MJBiz Con in Las Vegas. I'm pretty sure it's still the biggest convention in the cannabis industry every year. And Emilee Lewis is with us, and she is I think she's still the Senior VP of Strategy for MJBiz Con. Am I accurate with that, Emilee?
Yes. Senior Vice President and Brand Leader. Yep.
There you go. And you've brought along your partnership guy, right? This is Harrison Raide, right? Harrison's
my number one. He's not just my partnership guy. He's my number one. He's who you should know at MJBiz for sure.
Well, it's an honor for you to introduce me to him. Now, Harrison, you get to talk and tell us, what do you do there?
I am Emilee's partner. We spend about 12 hours a day together on camera, just like this. I am the Vice President of Sales and Partnerships, looking over mostly the trade show floor. I come from a decade of music industry. It's all about culture, all about bringing the tribes together, and that's what we're looking to do at MJBiz Con.
How can we get the industry to come together and show more respect for everybody? Because guess what? In the first 5, 6, 7 years, most people have lost more money than they've made. So it's not about the pie anymore. It's about being able to keep it ripe and edible so that we can enjoy it, because eventually it's going to happen. We're going to see normalization. We're going to see legalization. It's going to take time. But how do we get away from the craft growers pointing the fingers at the MSOs and that sort of thing?
You put a wolf pack together and you starve them for long enough, they turn on each other.
Right.
And that is what has happened in our industry. Our industry, taxes keep going up. Regulation still fails to pass. Business gets tougher and tougher every year. So you have an entire group that is starved. Right. And with business and regulations and laws and taxes and everything getting tougher and tougher, it's natural. It's the law of nature that the industry does turn on each other. So, I don't want to villainize the industry, but we do have a problem, 100%. And, I think one of the things that MJBiz is trying to do is bring people together, maybe that we wouldn't have even considered working with or partnering with, because maybe, people would have said, hey, you guys are actually competitors. You guys actually do the same thing. But, we actually could work together to connect the dots to make both of our businesses, better, and to create more ways for the industry to learn and grow and get what they need to help their business. So I think we have to lead by example. I don't think that telling someone not to villainize the other person, I can go, yell at someone in the hemp side all day long or yell at someone on the cannabis side and say, you guys shouldn't be doing that. You have to show. Words are only words. So that's one thing that Harrison and I are really adamant about, and the whole of the MJBiz team, is that we have to pave the way. We have to show by example. And I think, again, you'll see some of that in the way that MJBiz is evolving and the partners that we're bringing in.
The entire interview will be released in a Cannabis Coast to Coast News special report on Thursday. So, which state do you think consumes the most cannabis in this country? California would be the most logical choice since their revenue is still number one, but this is a different category. Amie Carter shares the results of a poll published on Statista.com that her state of Michigan is number 13 and number one. Well, Amie has that answer in our Michigan report this week.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters reporting from Mackinac City for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Let's dive in. A Michigan cannabis law firm is facing a major financial hit after falling victim to an online scam. The firm, led by Howell attorney Denise Palicella, lost over $540,000 in a fraudulent deal that sent money to Nigeria. A judge has now ordered her to repay the money to her bank. New data shows Michigan is a top state for cannabis use, coming in at number 13 nationally. The survey reports that roughly 21% of Michigan adults use cannabis in 2023. The most frequent users, that title goes to Vermont. The Cannabis Regulatory Agency has issued a public health recall for over 5,000 vape cartridges produced by Ann Arbor-based exclusive brands. The recall was issued after the CRA found issues with the product. Exclusive Brands is now facing another issue. The United Food and Commercial Workers International Union Local 876 has filed a complaint against the company, alleging it is blocking workers from organizing. And to save the best for last, I have good news, everyone. With a lack of interest in the Senate, the proposed roadside saliva testing bill is not moving forward at this time. A huge thank you to everyone who reached out to their lawmakers. This is a sigh of relief for now. As you may recall, cannabis advocates with the Michigan Weedsters, the ACLU, and the Michigan GOP Cannabis Caucus had been leading the fight against this bill. That is it for this week. I am Amie Carter with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The basic economic lessons of supply and demand are part of the story of the fledgling cannabis industry. Many new states are opening up without enough inventory, and then in the more mature markets, there is a glut of product. Of course, when there is too much flower in the market, the prices crash. And right now, the average cost for an ounce in this country is just over $250. So, with 24 states now contributing their own adult use sales to the billion-dollar industry, which state do you think has the lowest prices? If you guessed Oklahoma, you go to the head of the bud tender class. They are still just legally selling into a medical market, but with adult use signatures being collected for a ballot question right now, that market could get even bigger and cheaper. With more from Oklahoma, here's Kimmie Cannabis.
I am Kimmie Cannabis with Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As Alaina just reported, Oklahoma does in fact have the lowest prices on ounces of flowers in the nation at last check. But let's break down what that really means. A shake ounce can start as low as $10. Mid-quality flower averages around $80 an ounce. And higher-end craft cannabis can range anywhere from $100 to $300 an ounce. While these prices are great news for patients, they're not so great for growers, many of whom are struggling to stay afloat in such an oversaturated and competitive market. Next, big good news from Okie Wonderland. Owner Alan Suleiman has officially been cleared after a long, difficult battle with the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. All charges and license revocations have been dismissed. Alan claimed in a public social media statement that he endured months of rumors, negativity, and false accusations, but stood firm, provided evidence, and was ultimately vindicated. He emphasized that his company pays all state taxes, vendor bills, and operates above board. His message to the industry: the cannabis community should come together, not tear each other apart. And with new plans ahead, he says Okie Wonderland is just getting started. Finally, mark your calendars. Can I Talk About It will be broadcasting live on Saturday at 11 a.m. during Harvest Fest weekend in Spavinaw, Oklahoma, September 4th through the 6th. This is an adult event where we feature music, food, vendors, entertainment, camping, and community. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
While Oklahoma probably has a good chance of getting those signatures for the adult use initiative, Florida just won't give up trying. This week, the signature effort got a boost from a federal court decision regarding that process. Right now, the Sunshine State boasts the largest medical market in the country with 890,000 registered cardholders. In the fall presidential election, the Smart and Safe Florida group got 56% of the yes votes, and they still needed more. One vote even came from President Trump. That probably offset that state's Governor Ron DeSantis's no vote. But unfortunately, Smart and Safe Florida failed to get the required 60% of the vote to make the ballot results a law, something their Governor Ron DeSantis did not want. In fact, it was a law that DeSantis got passed this year that the federal judge ruled this week the state cannot stop the signature gathering activity. The judge ruled that DeSantis's law forced citizens to, quote, choose between curtailing their First Amendment rights or risk invalidation of verified petitions, crippling civil penalties, and further enforcement actions, unquote. DeSantis has tried many times to delay and thwart the pro-cannabis ballot initiatives by citizens. Consider the fact that his dislike of cannabis in his state stems from his own issues with the smell, something he has made fun of in the past. So now the signature process can commence again in Florida. So that battle continues. Speaking of battles, have you checked out what is going on in Alabama lately? Jennifer Boozer Stewart is leading the charge against a state government that is trying to do whatever it can to make it as difficult as possible to open any cannabinoid-related business.
For Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama. The Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission had the initial hearing in the administrative appeals process for licensing on Friday, August 29th. Dispensary license applicants are scheduled to be concluded in October with this administrative process. While the dispensary appeals being over in October should clear the way for dispensaries being open this year, we have been told Alabama will see sales by the end of every year for 4 years in a row. The patients desperately waiting for access, especially since hemp products have been all but erased by the passage of HB 445, remain skeptical. The Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission and integrated facility license applicants have been embroiled in numerous legal battles since the first licenses were awarded in 2022. We have seen licenses awarded and then rescinded 3 times already. Some skeptics believe the process will not yield tangible sales here at all and have lost hope. With the hemp industry crippled since July 1st, the sick, suffering, and dying people of Alabama are told to wait a little longer while greed and corruption pervade what the Alabama Cannabis Coalition calls the state-sanctioned medical cannabis cartel. The integrated category of applicants started the administrative process as well on Friday, and a schedule for the final hearing has not yet been set. We won't be holding our breath anymore. It is past time for the citizens of Alabama to refuse to accept this stalemate and demand action. We must vote out career politicians who keep the people sick and headed into shiny new mega prisons named after Governor Kay Ivey herself. Tune in to Sweet Home Cannabama Radio live every Monday at 7 p.m. on FM Talk 106.5 and our Sweet Home Cannabama YouTube page for the latest information every week for over 6 years now. Reporting from Alabama, I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A block or first section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, but we have many more state reports coming up, including a story about how the smell of cannabis in the air at the U.S. Tennis Open in New York is causing the players to complain, or at least one, anyway. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, and I'm Alaina Pinto. This is our international block of reports this week. Soon, our coverage of the international scene will be part of a new show designated to cover everything from all over the world. So if you have any ideas for the name of that show, you can share them with us at info@procannabismedia.com. We start with our coverage from outside the United States with the editor of the Business of Cannabis, Ben Stevens, with the European report. Then Dave Barton reports from the UK, and of course, Debi Facey in Canada.
I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's report from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The UK's long-running project to regulate CBD products has just taken a major step forward. Yesterday, the Food Standards Agency, the regulator responsible for the CBD project, announced the launch of a 12-week public consultation on the authorisation of 3 applications, which collectively represent almost 3,000 CBD isolate products. After half a decade of uncertainty, this consultation marks the final phase of the novel foods approval process, putting the UK on track to become the first country in the world to officially regulate CBD foods. The European Industrial Hemp Association called it a crucial milestone, confirming the safety profile of hemp-derived CBD. The 3 applications moving forward are RP07 from Puris, which includes 11 products, RP350 from Canneray with 43 products, and the largest by far, RP427, a consortium application covering hundreds of companies and around 2,700 products from the EIHA. These dossiers passed safety assessments last year and now have passed the risk management stage. Chanel McCoy, the founder of her namesake brand that owns Puris, said the progress is the result of a decade of investment in safety studies, adding that the FSA has set a new global standard for CBD regulation. The EIHA's president Daniel Cruz welcomed the step but cautioned that, quote, the details matter in the months ahead. And those details are exactly what the consultation is about. Over the next 3 months, stakeholders will weigh in on key issues, from the proposed 10 milligram daily intake limit, which severely restricts the amount of products that can be passed, to labelling requirements, THC thresholds, and the scope of products eligible for approval. The EIHA called the consultation period key to ensuring the final framework is both viable for businesses and safe for consumers. Responses will inform the FSA and Food Standards Scotland as they finalise recommendations to ministers, who will then change the law hopefully later this year. Thanks to regulatory reforms introduced in April, ministerial decisions now take immediate effect and are published directly onto the official register of authorised products. If approved, these products become the first fully regulated CBD foods in Great Britain, a shift that could reshape the market, strengthen consumer confidence, and serve as a model for regulators across the world. That's all from me this week. I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with the UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The UK government is set to ban a range of semi-synthetic cannabis compounds, including hexahydrocannabinol, HHC, as well as THC precursors, including THCAA and THCAB. The news comes following warnings from drug experts at the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, the ACMD, about potential health risks associated with synthetic cannabinoids and substances that mimic the effects and structures of naturally occurring compounds like CBD and THC. Britain's Minister for Policing and Crime Prevention, Dame Diana Johnson, confirmed she would implement controls under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 when parliamentary time allows. The cathedral city of Chichester, a well-to-do middle-class town on the south coast of Britain, has been named the UK's medical cannabis capital. Better known as the hometown of astronaut Tim Peake and for its festival theatre, according to a report from Relief Clinic, Chichester has more patients prescribed cannabis-based medicines than any other city in the country when measured against relative population size. Chichester is also one of the most expensive places to live in Britain, which may also indicate a cost barrier for many medical cannabis patients in other parts of the country. That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So we have in Canada this week is Google has finally allowed us to have a 20-week trial period when it comes to the Canadian retailers in order for them to advertise. This is not only going to be a bonus for us Canadians, but it's also going to be a bonus for everyone else due to the fact that now you'll be able to see kind of what our products are here in Canada and how we operate. But at the same time, I do feel that most of the advertisements will be focused more on education, which isn't a bad thing, but it still allows us to at least advertise and at least create or present some sort of stats when it comes to the promotion. Next, what we have is the initiative from Cancel by creating a upselling your, I will say, your bucket or your trash bin or your basket size, which means that being able to not only create your customer experience, but to be able to excel in creating an actual sizable cart, which means more than one item, which is only going to help the overall profit for that store, which is a great thing. Next we have is Surrey, BC has finally announced that they have accepted the opening of cannabis stores. So in Surrey, they have opened up the first store, which is Imagine, and they have 11 stores following in the next few months. And it's going to be great for BC Surrey because the fact that they have been fighting for them to be able to have cannabis stores. And now that they do, they don't have to worry about it as much anymore. This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
Usually when we talk about issues with hemp, the focus is on Texas. Well, now there is confusion with a New England state. This week, a group of farmers from Connecticut has filed a federal lawsuit against their state. The hemp program there started in 2021 when the state licensed farmers to grow hemp that met the federal guidelines of no more than 0.3% of THC in dry weight of flower. Then in 2024, their governor, Ned Lamont, signed a law that redefined the amount of THC in the product to make it more restrictive than the federal regulations. As you might expect, hemp licenses are now down 80% in that state. Connecticut is a legal adult use state, and now the licensed hemp farmers are stuck with crops that are classified as cannabis according to these new state rules. The farmers can't sell it since they don't have a license, a process that can take years, and capital that they just don't have. This is just another example of the mess the federal government created when they legalized the cannabis sativa plant with the 2018 Farm Bill and defined hemp with that 0.3% designation. There is now confusion in every state that has any program dealing with the legal, overregulated, and overtaxed cannabis industry and the hemp industry, which is underregulated. And this is why we are lucky to have a designated hemp reporter, Kerry Hinkle, who is in the business and has been involved with policy in Washington, D.C. for years. Here's Kerry's hemp report for this week.
This is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I am back again with a hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, right before Labor Day, we turn our attentions on hemp policy to the federal level, where Congressman Morgan Griffith of Virginia has released a discussion draft bill that would implement some much-needed guidelines and regulations of hemp extracts at the federal level. Now, it's important to note this is a discussion draft, and so it's not been formally introduced. It does not have a bill number or has been seeking other additional co-sponsors. The discussion draft is meant to be circulated to industry and political stakeholders to serve as a starting point in the conversation. And so there's a lot of things to like on this bill. There's guidelines and regulations on labeling and what you can and can't say on a package, do not appeal to children, all things that the industry very much supports. But there's a key difference in this bill in that it would establish a commission to come up with what types of THC limits would be allowed in hemp products from the federal level. And it's interesting that it would be an 18-person panel. 10 of them would come from the FDA and the scientific community. And so the majority shares of the voting rights in this committee would come from the scientific community that would not necessarily have any expertise in the hemp, cannabis, cannabinoid science. And so the really important distinction for the hemp community right now in this discussion draft is that if this committee, after 3 years, does not come up with a recommendation on THC limits, then it would trigger at 0.2 milligrams of THC per serving and 1 milligram of THC per package. And if this trigger language happened, what would that happen to states that have already codified hemp THC regulations that are higher than those really limited milligram limits? Is another thing that those in the hemp community, especially on the law side of things, are grappling with. Are states' rights going to be infringed here by this really small milligram limit of THC should and if this bill pass and make its way into law? So now the promising thing is it's in opposition to a complete ban that other politicians like Mary Miller from Illinois and Andy Harris from Maryland have proposed. And so it is a step in the right direction. Again, we're promised that it's a discussion draft. And so we're encouraged by the fact that this is a starting point and hopefully after our trip, I'll be in DC next week. So hopefully after conversations with stakeholders like ourselves, we can educate on the need for higher THC limits and work through some of the nuances. So positive news for once out of Capitol Hill as it relates to hemp, but some key important factors to still work through. So again, I am Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I will see you again next week with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We'll see you then.
Another great example of the disparity in cannabis law between the feds and the states is Virginia. The outgoing governor there, Glenn Youngkin, vetoed not one, but 2 different laws that would have opened adult use sales of the plant medicine. Now, with Youngkin's term up, that governor's race is wide open. Joe Parsons tells us every week which candidates are supporting full adult use legalization and which ones want Virginia to continue its existing medical program. Here's Joe's Virginia report for the week.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The second meeting was held this week to discuss the future of the adult use cannabis market in the Commonwealth, in Richmond, Virginia. Virginia's bipartisan commission to establish the guidelines for the hopefully upcoming adult use market met again in the Capitol. And this time they listened to experts from other legal states to avoid the pitfalls that have hindered successful launches. The committee was founded after Governor Glenn Youngkin vetoed and killed all hopes for the market for the second year in a row. Lawmakers from both sides have seen the need to fulfill the promises that were made in lieu of the stance that Youngkin has taken since he took office. The second meeting was a huge success, as not only did they listen to other states, but local businesses that could benefit from a booming new market. The stakes are higher than ever, as this election cycle has 3 statewide offices and all 100 seats in the House are on the ballot. We will definitely continue to keep you informed as these meetings develop. Now, last week on Coffee Talk, Seth asked me if Abigail Spanberger had actually spoken out in favor of cannabis reform. We were discussing how politicians often indicate that they might lean towards an idea or principle. However, they never actually decisively say one way or another how they feel about it, or if they will actually act on those feelings. Well, the good news for Virginians is that Democratic candidate Spanberger has indeed spoken out in favor of the legal market and would do what Governor Youngkin would never do, and that's pass the bill into law. She said in an interview with the Mercury that, "I support a legal marketplace for cannabis," going on to say that, "I want to ensure that it is fully regulated, people know what they're buying, and that revenues go towards education." With the election less than 3 months away, her opponent, Winston Earl Sears, has not even attempted to discuss her views, other than to say that she agrees with the opinion of her current boss, Glenn Youngkin. So, we know what that says about the cannabis industry if she wins. As of this recording, Spanberger has a considerable lead in the Virginia polls, according to early polling data. I'd also like to give a shout out to Dave Barton, that's WPCM-TV's own British correspondent, for being on Coffee Talk for this week. So thanks, Dave. That's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
We welcome back Karen Black as our Arizona correspondent this week. She has a story of continued growth for some operators in her state, including one company that can output 30,000 gummies in a day. Here's Karen in Arizona.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First up, Copper State Farms, a vertically integrated single-state operator here in Arizona, just opened a massive new production kitchen in Tempe that can churn out 30,000 gummies in a day. The expansion shows the company's optimism despite declining sales across the state. Copper State is the parent company of Soulflower, which has 9 dispensaries across Phoenix and Tucson. It seems the company is doubling down on efficiency and automation as the market gets more competitive. Meanwhile, Washington-based vape brand M-Fused has partnered with Arizona's Flow Distribution to expand into nearly 3/4 of the state's dispensaries. It's another sign brands are adjusting their strategies as Arizona's once booming cannabis market matures and prices continue to drop. But it's not just legal cannabis making news. Scottsdale police recently made a major drug bust in the heart of its downtown tourist district, arresting 2 men and seizing $34,000 worth of illegal drugs. Officers found cocaine, ketamine, meth, MDMA, Xanax, and some synthetic drugs during the operation in Old Town Scottsdale, which is an area packed with bars, nightclubs, and visitors from around the world. Police say one suspect was a major supplier of cocaine and club drugs in the area. They also recovered $45,000 in cash and 3 illegal firearms. The bust highlights the ongoing challenge law enforcement faces as both legal and illegal drug markets operate side by side in entertainment districts in Arizona. While licensed dispensaries work to expand their reach, authorities continue cracking down on unlicensed sales that put locals and tourists at risk. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One state that is trying to do the right thing when it comes to regulating the entire cannabis sativa plant is Missouri. However, trying to streamline that effort with a single set of regulations has both sides of the plant fighting against each other. The same thing is happening right now in Texas with a fledgling medical program pitched against a thriving hemp market. Missourians for a Single Market has only raised $6,000 for their ballot initiative for the 2026 elections, and getting traction from either side of this issue has been difficult. What's amazing to many is that this is the same plant that the federal government defined legal by limiting the intoxicating cannabinoid THC to 0.3%. And now, with two viable billion-dollar industries pointing the finger at one another, is causing a divide with more confusion for citizens and law enforcement. This all could have been avoided if the FDA had stepped in right after the Farm Bill of 2018 was passed and set regulations like they were supposed to do, but instead they did not do that. In the meantime, a new state entering this arena is Minnesota, and Alysha Bellamy is right in the middle of the educational and licensing process. Here's her report for the week.
I'm Alysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm also a proud member of the Minnesota Cannabis College and the founder of Herbs and Herbs. Today we're going to be talking about the grant programs that DEED has awarded. They awarded $3.6 million. We have the Can Navigate program, which is a grant that helps with regulatory and legal and technical support. Then we have the Can Startup, which is a grant that helps nonprofit organizations fund micro businesses. Then we also have the Can Train grant, which our organization, Minnesota Cannabis College, received $250,000. And that is to help people enter the cannabis industry. More news is that Minnesota is being sued again by home growers. There's a provision in our state's constitution that says that marijuana should be treated like any other produce. So if you're a gardener, a farmer, or a home grower, you should have the same provisions to be able to sell what you've grown and bring it to market. That does it for this edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alysha Bellamy.
That'll do it for the B block, but we have one more section coming up, and in that final section of the show, the saga of the sheriff from Suffolk County in Massachusetts. Stephen Tompkins was in federal court last week facing extortion and fraud charges. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
I'm Joe Parsons from WPCM-TV's Cannabis Coast to Coast News with a special announcement from Patients At a Time. Patients At a Time is a Virginia-based nonprofit organization dedicated to educating folks about the therapeutic use of cannabis. Did you know about the indigenous cannabinoid system in the human body? Do you know the best form of delivery for your specific health issues? Do you know about the potential risk related to the use of cannabis? Are you concerned about becoming addicted to cannabis? Do you know how to grow your own plants? Get these questions and a lot more answered at the 16th National Clinical Conference on Cannabis Therapeutics, coming to Charlottesville on September 14th through the 16th. Patients At a Time has been to the leading educational forum since 1995. Come and learn from the best. Please go to www.patientsatatime.com for more information. And as always, my friends, stay lifted.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the C Block, and I'm Alaina Pinto. You probably think that Boston is the largest and oldest city in New England, but if you know your history, it was Plymouth, Massachusetts that has the distinction of being one of the oldest cities in the new America. And now, 250 years later, Boston is in the news again, this time for the actions of Stephen Tompkins, the Suffolk County Sheriff who entered a not guilty plea on extortion charges in federal court this week. He had made an early stage investment with MSO Ascend Wellness, and when that company ran into financial trouble, Tompkins tried to get his money back and was denied, of course. This week, to no one's surprise, he resigned from his position as Suffolk County Sheriff in Boston. Here's the Bay State Report with Curtis Emery.
My name's Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In a continuing story here out of Massachusetts, Suffolk County Sheriff Stephen Tompkins has seen his day in court for 2 federal charges that were brought against him this summer. Tompkins, who was arrested this month in Florida based on extortion charges here in Massachusetts, had paid his $200,000 bail, made it back to Mass, and is now appearing in court to fight these charges. Of the charges, Tompkins is pleading not guilty. The charges allege that Tompkins used his position to extort $50,000 out of a local Massachusetts cannabis company. That cannabis company is Ascend Wellness. Tompkins, who bought stock and then demanded to get back the amount he paid for the stock after the stock crashed, is accused of extortion. Now, the mess begins with Tompkins using his position as a Suffolk County Sheriff and leveraging the social equity program that his department ran with Ascend, allowing Ascend to train and use employees recommended from the police department to help secure this stock. And he was hoping to make some money in the cannabis market, but when it went downhill, he demanded for his money back, and that's where the trouble begins again. Now, none of his close allies in the political landscape have called for him to leave his post, and all are curious to see how the charges stick as new information comes out. Quite recently, he has also announced, or I should say his lawyer has announced, that Tompkins will be taking a medical leave as prescribed by his doctor until the federal case is over. Tompkins' lawyer is assured anyone listening that by 1 year into the case, he will certainly be found not guilty. I have been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Despite a law of information during the summer months, the state of Pennsylvania is still the odds-on favorite to become the 25th legal adult use state in this country. Their governor, Josh Shapiro, is on record saying he will sign a bill if presented to him by his legislature. While that movement is on hold for now, Jushi Holdings, an MSO that operates or owns 97 dispensaries in the Keystone State, is going on the offensive, targeting that state's unregulated THC hemp products. Jushi Holdings, a public company based in Florida, is now suing the intoxicating THC market for, quote, selling illegal products into unregulated retail channels directly undermines the Commonwealth's regulated medical marijuana program, unquote. This was first reported by the Philadelphia Inquirer. This is just another example of the growing division in the industry. But in the meantime, merger and acquisitions continue as Agrify is making a major buy of Green Thumb Industries' product line. Here is Doug Miller with his High on Wall Street.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Agrify Corporation just made a power move. The company has officially acquired some of the most well-known cannabis brands from Green Thumb Industries, including Rhythm, in a $50 million deal. But here's the twist. Green Thumb will still manufacture and distribute those brands under a licensing agreement, while Agrify rebrands itself as Rhythm Inc. Starting September 2nd, investors will see the company trading on the NASDAQ under a brand new ticker RYM. Rhythm strategy: double down on licensing revenue and expand hemp-derived THC products, including its fast-growing Rhythm Beverages line. CEO Ben Kovler says Demand for THC is rising as more consumers look for healthier alternatives to alcohol, and now these products aren't limited to dispensaries anymore. So let's see what the stock chart looks like. It's trading around $47.12, and it did pop up this week on that news. It could run up a little bit more, but watch for some pullback as it sets back up, and be sure to trade smart and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Every week, more and more research studies on cannabis are released, and lawmakers continue to make noise that more research is needed and could happen if cannabis moves to Schedule 3, but no one knows exactly what that move will mean. Many industry advocates share results of thousands of already existing studies whenever the subject of more research is needed. Sure enough, a few more came out last week. One out of Brazil concludes that CBD dosing can lower your blood pressure, and another here in the States was released by the prestigious Johns Hopkins University Hospital in Maryland. That's where our enlightened one, Christopher Bright, lives, and he has our Maryland report.
I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. A new study published in Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research finds no link between regular cannabis use and kidney disease. Researchers from Johns Hopkins and Tulane universities analyzed data from over 1,500 adults in Baltimore with an average age of 48, mostly black and female participants. The study, spanning 8.6 years, showed that regular cannabis users were not at higher risk for chronic kidney disease, rapid kidney functions compared to non-users. Even after accounting for factors like cigarettes or opioid use, the findings align with prior research suggesting cannabis does not harm kidney health. However, researchers call for further studies to explore the effects of different cannabis consumption methods and dosages, especially when growing variety of cannabis products. And now we have our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Charity, aka M.O.R.E Cherry. Charity has been a force since high school. Creativity and dancing has always been in her blood. As a brand ambassador and social media manager for Cookies Baltimore, watching her dancing in her reels or stunning a runway is amazing. Stop by Cookies Baltimore and say hi, and follow her on IG at @bmore_cherry. And that's all for the Maryland's Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Ohio is celebrating the one-year anniversary of the launch of their adult use market with an announcement that $700 million in sales was collected. Another announcement should help put that total over $1 billion over the next year, because that state approved pre-rolls for sale. While flower and buds are still consumed by 50% of the consumers in the United States, pre-rolls claim 16% of the market. And now that they are approved for sale in Ohio, watch that $700 million grow like a weed, if you will. That $1 billion club was reached a long time ago in Nevada, and that's where Tina Tasaka reports from every week.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The first indigenous cannabis producer has partnered with Cookies in New York. A new licensing agreement was announced with a cannabis processor licensed by the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. Operating out of the Akwesasne Mohawk territory, the brand name O-Se-Le will produce the same Cookies branded products available in dispensaries nationwide. These products are now available on New York State tribal territories, and customers can confirm legitimacy by checking for the Cookies authenticity sticker on packaging. Cookies highlighted that the name means fire in the Mohawk language and has proven to be a strong partner to help meet demand in the growing New York tribal market. Early Sunday, August 24th, Nevada suffered a major ransomware-style cyber attack that forced the shutdown of state government offices, websites, and phone lines for about 2 days. Investigation is ongoing with state and federal agencies, including CISA and the FBI. They were involved. Most public-facing systems went offline. The DMV locations shut down and phone lines disrupted. So in regards to the Cannabis Compliance Board, Their regulatory software was not impacted, so core operations continued. Electronic payments via Acela were unable to be processed due to the outage. No penalties would be assessed for delays. This recent and not the first Nevada cyber attack is a wake-up call for many and every cannabis business. This industry is especially vulnerable. Heavy regulation, reliance on digital compliance systems, and large volumes of sensitive customer and financial data make cannabis companies prime targets for hackers. Bottom line, cyber criminals are evolving rapidly. Vigilance and proactive security are the only way to protect your cannabis licensing, your customers, and your future. That's it for the Nevada highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the most respected trade shows that has grown its influence here on the East Coast is NECANN, the New England Cannabis Convention. They have expanded from its roots here in Massachusetts and operate at least 6 events now. And this upcoming weekend, they are in Atlantic City, New Jersey. That's been a regular stop on NECANN Traveling Party for years now. And this week, they will have their regular variety of speakers and parties. And now that consumption lounges are open and operational, you know this Friday and Saturday, the 5th and 6th, will be networking party on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. With more from the Garden State, here's Jill Goldsberry.
Jersey Cannabis reporter Jill Goldsberry here for you with the Cannabis Coast to Coast News New Jersey report. And as we roll into fall, the calendars are starting to get full. This week, the whole industry is gearing up for the NECANN Atlantic City event, which I'm hearing there are quite a few things that you're going to want to check out, including the Women's Blunt Brunch and the Cannabis Cup of Champions and the View opening night reception, all on Friday, September 5th. And New Jersey is leading the industry with upcoming events for the cannabis industry, including right now what's going on, the Best in Grass competition that's going on from now till September 28th. This is a competition for the consumer. So you literally, all you need to do is go to your participating dispensaries and get the Best in Grass kit, and you are part of the competition, and you are part of the judging community for Best in Grass. Also, we have the Best in Consumer Cannabis Business event coming up on October 15th. So these are some things you might want to look out for as New Jersey is leading in industry events for the cannabis business industry. I'm Jill Goldsberry with the Coast to Coast Cannabis News report for New Jersey.
And finally today, did you happen to see the South Park episode this past week? I did not, but it was all about the reclassification of cannabis. I'll have to watch it. The satirical animated series originated in Colorado in 2012, the same year that state legalized adult use. But the show creators have displayed a pro-cannabis slant in their humor for all 27 seasons. And Trey Parker and Matt Stone are the creators who have won dozens of industry awards. But this past season, they are feasting on the political reality of President Trump's second term. In season 27, episode 3, one of the characters that boasts about the show's Integrity Farms brand complains that ICE raided his grow facility and took all of his workers. Obviously, a satirical look at the serious raid at Glass House Farms, California, over a month ago. But South Park is just another example of normalization coming to comedy using cannabis as the vehicle. All comedic creators can thank Cheech and Chong for that one. Still, the pioneers of the first pro-cannabis creators. That will do it, though, for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume it responsibly, and we'll see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amie Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for y'all all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
The quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. Now we even have our own app. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.